"Sir, please marry my mommy. She's all I've got left." And just like that, the cold-hearted billionaire stopped walking, because something about this child, her voice, her eyes, felt too familiar to ignore. This is a story about love lost, secrets buried, and a little girl brave enough to ask for a miracle. It was supposed to be just another Monday evening. The city lights had begun to flicker on, casting gold across the glass walls of Kane and Bishop Holdings, a towering symbol of wealth, power, and a man who never looked back. That man, Adrian Kane, stepped out through the revolving doors in his signature black coat, cold, unbothered, efficient. His team trailed behind him, rattling off tomorrow's schedule like robots trained to match his pace. Then it happened. A soft voice rose from the sidewalk. "Sir, please marry my mommy. She's all I've got left now." Adrian stopped, dead in his tracks. At first, he thought he imagined it. The voice was small, shaky, barely louder than the rustle of the wind through the city. But then he looked down and saw her, a little girl, no older than 5. She stood barefoot on the marble entrance, her thin dress soaked from the drizzle. Her curly brown hair was wet and clung to her cheeks. In one hand, she held a crumpled paper flower. In the other, she clung to his sleeve. Adrian blinked. Security moved toward her, confused. But the girl didn't run. She didn't cry louder. She just looked up at him with eyes too big and too broken for a child. "My mommy is sick, really sick, and I think you're a nice man," she said softly. "And if you marry her, she won't die." Behind her, gasps echoed. Adrian's assistant reached forward. "Should I?" "No," Adrian said firmly, eyes locked on the girl. And then a woman's voice rang out. "Elsie, no, baby, you can't just—" She ran forward, limping slightly, hair pulled back in a loose bun, her face pale and panicked. Adrian looked up. His breath caught. It couldn't be, but it was. Her, Amelia Rowan, the woman he had loved once, deeply, recklessly, before he shattered her heart 6 years ago. And now, her daughter was begging him to marry her, and something inside him, something buried for years, began to stir. For a moment, Amelia didn't speak. She just stood there, drenched in the rain, clutching her daughter to her chest, as if trying to shield her from a world that had already taken too much. Adrian couldn't look away. The woman before him wasn't the carefree artist he remembered from college. The girl who used to paint sunflowers on napkins and talk about opening an art school for children. No, this Amelia looked worn. Her once bright eyes were now ringed with shadows, her cheeks hollowed, her frame thinner. But even in her exhaustion, there was something unshakably strong about her. Adrian's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but the words got stuck. Amelia held the little girl, Elsie, close, whispering gently, "Sweetheart, you can't do things like that. We've talked about this." "But he's kind, Mommy," Elsie replied softly, looking back at Adrian. I saw it in his eyes. That sentence hit him harder than it should have. Kind? No one had used that word for him in years. "I'm so sorry," Amelia said, finally meeting his gaze. Her voice cracked as she struggled to stand tall. "I had no idea We'll leave. I didn't mean for her to do this." Adrian stepped forward, hand half raised. "Amelia," she stiffened, the sound of her name in his voice, after all this time, sent something flickering through her. Pain, surprise, maybe even something she didn't want to name. "I didn't know you were in the city," he said, voice low, careful. "I've been here for a while," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Just under the radar." Elsie turned her small face up to Amelia. "Mommy, do you know him?" Adrian crouched down, not to intimidate, not to question, just to see the girl again. "Elsie," he said gently, "why did you say those words? About marrying your mom?" Elsie looked at him, innocent and heartbreaking. "Because you looked like someone who could help her, and I didn't know what else to do." And with that, Amelia closed her eyes, because deep down, She knew her daughter had just cracked open the past she'd spent years trying to bury. And now Adrian Kane was staring straight into it. That night, Adrian Kane sat alone in his penthouse suite, the city sprawling beneath him like a kingdom he had conquered. But for once, he didn't feel victorious. He felt haunted by a pair of wide brown eyes, by the rain in Amelia's hair, by the small voice that said, "Please marry my mummy." Adrian loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of scotch, but it sat untouched on the table, because something wasn't adding up. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl, Elsie. There was something about her, more than the bravery of her request, more than her obvious love for her mother. It was her face, the shape of her eyes, her tiny furrowed brow when she spoke, the way she tilted her head when she was unsure. It was all familiar, painfully familiar. Adrian reached for a photo he hadn't touched in years, one he kept tucked away in a drawer beneath his desk. It was old and bent at the edges. A picture of him and Amelia, sitting on the steps of their college library, her hair tangled in the wind, her smile pressed into his shoulder. He stared at it for a long time, and then looked back toward his memory of Elsie. Could it be? He ran a hand down his face, suddenly breathless. She looked like him, not just Amelia. Him! His phone vibrated on the table. A message from his assistant. "We've pulled a public database profile on Amelia Rowan, as you requested. One dependent. No registered partner. Would you like a deeper report?" He stared at the screen. And for the first time in years, Adrian Kane felt something cold slip beneath his ribs. Fear. Because if what he suspected was true, then he hadn't just walked away from a woman who once loved him. He had walked away from a child he never knew existed, his child. And now that truth was staring back at him, in the eyes of a girl brave enough to ask him to save the only person she had left. Adrian had always lived by a code. Don't look back. The past was a weight, and he'd worked too hard to cut loose every chain. But the next day, long after the office had emptied and everyone else had gone home, he broke his own rule. The file lay open before him. Amelia Rowan, age 32, status unemployed, no listed spouse or emergency contact. Dependent, Elsie Rowan, age 5, father, not listed. He scrolled further, his jaw clenched. Amelia had been in and out of urgent care 3 times in the past 6 months. Chest pain, dizziness, fatigue. One note from a clinic doctor stood out. Patient shows signs of congestive heart failure. No insurance. Referred to specialist. Follow-up unlikely due to financial barrier. Adrian's hands tightened around the edges of the printout. She was sick, really sick, and she hadn't told anyone. She was raising a child alone, in silence, with a body that was slowly breaking down. And no one had noticed, no one but her daughter. Adrian stood up abruptly, pacing the room. The city lights flickered through the tall glass windows, but he barely saw them. He thought about the way Amelia had flinched when she saw him, the way she tried to leave without letting him speak, the way she held Elsie so tightly. She had been protecting them. From him? From the world? Or just from hope? His phone buzzed again. Shall we contact the Child Protection Agency regarding the living conditions? No. He typed it fast, his jaw locked. Do nothing. This stays with me. He closed the file, but not the ache in his chest. Because now the truth was clear. Amelia wasn't just his past. Elsie wasn't just a stranger's child. She was his, and the woman who had once been his entire world was dying quietly in a city where he held all the power to help, and hadn't. Until now, Amelia sat on the edge of her small bed, the sound of the city muffled behind the cracked window pane. Elsie was asleep, curled up beside her, one hand resting on her mother's arm. Her tiny chest rose and fell gently, lips parted in the soft hum of dreams. Amelia looked down at her, brushing a curl from her cheek. Then she turned away and wiped her eyes. Her body ached, not from the long shift at the bakery, not even from the dull, growing pain in her chest. It was the ache of secrets, of choices, of carrying everything alone. She stood, walked softly to the kitchen, and sat at the table. The sketchpad was still there, her sanctuary. She flipped it open to a blank page, but tonight she didn't draw. She wrote, "I saw him today. Elsie touched his coat like she had every right to. And in that moment I forgot how to breathe. He hasn't changed much. Still sharp, still cold on the surface. But when he saw her, something flickered, like he knew. Like some part of him recognized her. But I won't tell him. I can't." She paused, her fingers trembling. "How do you tell a man you once loved that he has a daughter he never met? How do you say, 'I needed you and you never came'? When he left for London, he never even said goodbye. Just vanished. Maybe he thought I'd be fine. Maybe he never wanted to look back. But I looked back. Every day. Every appointment. Every fever. Every birthday. Every night she cried for me and I had nothing left to give. I chose her. I didn't tell him because I couldn't bear the thought of him showing up out of guilt. Or worse, out of pity. He made his choice then, and I made mine. But now she's getting older. She asks questions. She watches the other kids with their fathers. And I can't give her the one thing she wants. Not love, not toys. Stability, a future. And now that he's seen her, I'm afraid everything will change." A single tear dropped onto the page, smudging the ink. Amelia closed the book and pressed her hand to her chest, where the pain was growing worse every day. She had buried the truth to protect her child. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Adrian Kane had signed billion-dollar deals. He had reshaped skylines, rebuilt companies, walked into rooms where no one dared question him. But he had never felt as powerless as he did now. Watching from across the street as his daughter skipped toward school in shoes that were worn at the edges. He stayed hidden, tucked inside the back seat of a black SUV. He watched her wave goodbye to Amelia, who stood at the corner clutching her coat tight against the morning chill. They looked like 1,000 other families in the city. Ordinary, invisible. But they weren't invisible to him anymore. Adrian had spent the last 3 mornings like this. Watching, following. Observing. He knew it was wrong. He should have walked up to them, should have spoken. But how do you approach a life you abandoned without knowing? How do you say, "I'm sorry I wasn't there for your first steps. I'm sorry I didn't know you existed"? You don't. You watch. You learn. You wait for the right moment, if it ever comes. He had watched Amelia carry home groceries that looked far too heavy for her fragile frame. He'd seen her struggle to hide the pain in her walk. He'd followed them to a pharmacy, where she picked up only half her prescription. She couldn't afford the rest. His chest ached with every detail. How had he not known? How had he walked away from this? But today something different happened. At the bus stop, Elsie suddenly wobbled, then collapsed. Her little knees hit the pavement as her eyes fluttered shut. Adrian didn't think. He threw the car door open and ran. "Elsie!" Amelia cried, dropping her bag and falling to her knees. Adrian knelt beside her. Amelia looked up, shock spreading across her pale face. "What are you—" "I was nearby," he lied. His arms gently scooped up the small girl, her head resting against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're okay." She stirred slightly, eyes barely open. "Daddy?" she murmured. Adrian's heart shattered. Amelia gasped, but said nothing, because in that single broken word, everything changed. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft beep of machines and the gentle hum of filtered air. Elsie lay asleep, her tiny hand resting on the scratchy blanket. Her face, though pale, looked peaceful. A nurse had cleaned the small scrape on her knee. An IV now delivered fluids her little body had desperately needed. Adrian sat beside the bed, motionless. His hand hovered over hers, but he hadn't touched it. He wasn't sure if he had the right to. Amelia stood across the room, arms folded tightly around herself. For the first time in a long time she looked cornered. Not proud, not strong, just tired. "She's going to be fine," the nurse had said earlier. "Just a bit dehydrated. Low blood sugar, probably from stress." Stress. Adrian looked up at Amelia now, his voice low. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her jaw tightened. "I didn't think it would matter." He rose slowly, his chair scraping lightly across the tile. "She's my daughter." Silence. Amelia didn't confirm it. She didn't deny it either. She just turned away and looked out the window, where rain now streaked down the glass, like tears neither of them could cry. "I found your file," Adrian said. "I saw what you've been going through. The illness, the bills. I had no idea." "You weren't supposed to," she whispered. He took a step forward. "But why, Amelia? Why carry this alone?" She turned then, slowly, painfully. Her eyes shimmered but didn't fall apart. "Because you left me, Adrian. You left without a word. No goodbye, no explanation. Just gone." His throat clenched. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you left," she continued. "And I told myself I could raise her on my own, that I wouldn't beg a man who walked away." Adrian's voice cracked. "I didn't know. I know that now," she said softly. "But for years I thought, maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe she wasn't." His face fell. No, don't say that. But I had to keep going. For her." She looked toward Elsie. "She was all I had. So I worked. I fought. I tried. Even when I was sick." Adrian stepped closer. "She's smart, kind, brave," he said. "She reminds me of someone." Amelia managed a small, trembling smile. "She's better than both of us." He knelt beside the bed, finally letting his hand touch Elsie's. "I want to be part of her life," he whispered. "Whatever it takes." Amelia didn't reply, but she didn't stop him either. And that silence, it was the beginning of something new. The next afternoon, Amelia heard a knock at the door. Soft, unsure. Not the kind that belonged to a delivery man or a neighbor. She opened it slowly, and there he was. Adrian Kane, not in a suit, not with bodyguards. Just in a plain sweater, dark jeans, and a look she hadn't seen on his face in over a decade. Something vulnerable. He held nothing but a small paper bag. "I brought soup," he said awkwardly. Amelia blinked. "Soup?" He shrugged. "Elsie likes carrots, right?" She narrowed her eyes. "How would you know that?" Adrian didn't answer. He just gave her a sheepish smile, then held the bag up. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was small, modest, but clean and warm. Toys lined one wall. A faded sofa sat beneath the window. A painting of a sunflower hung above the shelf. Unfinished. He noticed the little things. The wear in the cushions. The stack of unpaid bills under a book. The faint scent of lavender and childhood. Amelia walked to the kitchen and began unpacking the soup in silence. Adrian stood awkwardly in the living room, his eyes landing on a photo taped to the wall. Elsie at her 3rd birthday, frosting smeared on her nose, smiling up at the camera. He swallowed hard. "You never told me," he said again, softer this time. "I didn't think I could," she replied, not looking up. "You were gone, and I was scared." "You should have been," he said. "I wasn't ready. I was selfish. I ran from everything." Amelia turned then slowly, spoon in hand. "But you're here now." Adrian took a step forward, then another. "I don't just want to help," he said. "I want to stay." She blinked. "I want to be there for every school project, every fever, every art show. I want to earn your trust again. And Elsie's." He paused, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a key. Not a ring, not a diamond, just a key. "To a home I bought today. A bigger place, close to her school, with sunlight for your paintings. I'm not asking you to say yes now. I'm asking you to let me try." Amelia stared at the key, her heart beat faster. Not with romance, but with fear, with hope, with questions she hadn't dared to ask. "This isn't a fairy tale," she said. "I know," Adrian replied. "It's a second chance, if you want it." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes unreadable. Then she took the key, not as a promise, but as a maybe, and that was enough, for now. It was just past 6 in the evening when the world tipped sideways. Amelia had finished her shift at the bakery early. The heat of the ovens clung to her skin, and her back ached in that dull, quiet way it always did now. But she'd promised Elsie she'd bring home her favorite strawberry buns. She clutched the brown paper bag as she walked down the street. Her hair was tied back, cheeks flushed from the summer sun, but she smiled to herself, because for the first time in years, she felt something like peace. Adrian had been around more lately, not hovering, just showing up when it counted. Last week he helped Elsie finish her school project. Yesterday he repaired the broken curtain rod without being asked. He'd even taken the day off to walk them to the park on Sunday. And Amelia, she had started to breathe again, but as she rounded the corner to their apartment complex, something shifted. The ground tilted. The air vanished. Pain gripped her chest like a vice. She stumbled. The paper bag fell. Her legs buckled. Then nothing. The paramedics found her collapsed on the sidewalk. A woman nearby dialing emergency. In her purse was a worn envelope marked, "In case of emergency," with only one name scribbled across the flap in shaking handwriting. Adrian Kane. 20 minutes later, Adrian stood in the ER lobby, breathless, wild-eyed, and still in his shirt sleeves. "Where is she?" he demanded. The nurse hesitated, staring at the name on the clipboard. "Your family?" "Yes," Adrian said without blinking. "I'm the only one she has." They let him through. She was unconscious, pale and still, a fragile silhouette against the white hospital linens. Tubes snaked from her arms. Machines beeped steadily. Adrian felt like he couldn't breathe. The doctor pulled him aside, face grim. "She's in heart failure," he said. "Her condition's deteriorated rapidly. We can stabilize her, but she'll need immediate surgery. And a donor heart. We have a match, but the paperwork and financial commitment must be signed now." The words barely made sense. But Adrian didn't flinch. He took the clipboard, signed every line, and turned back toward the woman he had once let slip away. This time, he wouldn't. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft scribble of crayon on paper. Elsie sat cross-legged on a plastic chair, a box of broken crayons beside her, drawing carefully on the back of an old medical form the nurse had given her. Her eyes were puffy, her cheeks blotchy, but her hand was steady. She drew 3 people, a tall man in a dark coat, a lady in a soft blue dress with a heart on her chest, and a little girl between them holding both their hands. She shaded the sky with blue and the grass with green. Then she reached for the yellow crayon, the smallest stub, and added a sun in the corner, a sun that was smiling. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. He had been pacing the hall for hours, making calls to transplant coordinators, confirming post-surgery care, arranging a private suite, all without breaking once. But seeing her now, this tiny girl who had unknowingly shattered his world just days ago, brought him to his knees in a different way. Elsie looked up. "Mr. Adrian," she whispered. He knelt down beside her. "You can call me Adrian," he said gently. She studied his face, then reached for the paper. "I made this for Mommy," she said, "so she knows I'm not scared." Adrian swallowed. "You're very brave." "I had to be," she said simply. "Sometimes when Mommy was sick, I pretended I wasn't scared so she could sleep better." Adrian felt a lump rise in his throat. Elsie pointed to the drawing. "That's you," she said, tapping the tall figure. "And that's me, and that's Mommy, after she wakes up." He nodded, tears pressing at the edge of his eyes. "Can I tell you a secret?" she said, her voice small. "Anything." She leaned in. Before she fainted, "Mommy said your name in her sleep." Adrian blinked. Elsie took his hand. "She still loves you. I know it. I just..." "No." He looked at their joined hands, then at the drawing. And for the first time since all of this began, he let a tear fall. Because love, when spoken by a child, carried a truth no adult pride could deny. The world moved slowly in the hours after Amelia's surgery. Machines beeped. Nurses whispered. The hallway lights dimmed to evening glow. Adrian hadn't left her side. He sat slouched in a plastic chair beside her bed, his coat draped over his lap, tie undone, eyes red from exhaustion. On the small couch across the room, Elsie had finally drifted off. Curled beneath a fuzzy hospital blanket, her arms wrapped around a stuffed elephant Adrian had bought from the gift shop downstairs. Amelia had been unconscious for nearly 12 hours. The transplant had gone well, the doctor said. Her heart, her new heart, was beating strong. But Adrian didn't relax. He held her hand like it was a thread tying him back to earth. He watched the way her chest rose and fell. Steady now. Watched the line of her jaw, more peaceful than it had been in weeks. He thought of the girl she used to be, the one who painted sunrises and laughed in bookstores. Then he thought of the woman she had become, stronger, fiercer, braver. She had raised a daughter, fought an illness, faced the world without him. He'd never admired anyone more. It was past midnight when she stirred. Her fingers twitched, and slowly her lashes fluttered open. "Adrian!" she rasped. He shot up, eyes wide. "I'm here." Her eyes focused on him, dazed. "You stayed." "I'm not leaving," he whispered. Amelia blinked, her throat dry. "Elsie?" "She's here, she's safe. She's been drawing, waiting for you." A soft smile brushed her lips. He reached into his coat pocket not for a ring, but for a piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly, handwritten, slightly creased. His vow. "Can I read you something?" he asked. She nodded faintly. He cleared his throat, voice tight. "You gave me the one thing I didn't know I needed. Purpose. You gave me a daughter, a second chance. You gave me love without conditions, even when I didn't deserve it. I walked away once. I won't do it again. If you'll let me, I'll spend every day earning the life we could have had. Not with promises, but with presence. I want to grow old beside you, Amelia. Not as the man I was, but as the man you believed I could be." He looked up, voice breaking. "Let me stay. Let me build this life. With you. With her. With us." Tears slid down Amelia's temples as she looked at him. This man who had once broken her heart, and now held it with both hands. She didn't say yes. She simply squeezed his hand. And that was more powerful than any vow. Because this wasn't a wedding. It was something rarer. A beginning that almost never was. Finally coming true. There was no grand cathedral, no red carpet, no designer gown flown in from Paris. Just a garden, tucked behind a small community art center, where Amelia once taught free classes to neighborhood children. It was a place filled with color and quiet joy, where sunlight filtered through vines and laughter echoed like music. And on that golden afternoon it became sacred ground. Amelia stood beneath a wooden arch, wrapped in white ribbon and wildflowers picked by Elsie. Her dress was simple. Ivory cotton, lace at the sleeves, flowing to her ankles. No veil, no jewels. Only a paper flower tucked into her hair, the same one Elsie had made the night before. She looked radiant, not because of the dress, not even because of the sunlight, but because she had survived, because she had chosen to live. Adrian waited for her at the other end of the aisle, dressed in a soft gray suit with no tie. Per her request, just a lily pinned to his lapel. Between them stood Elsie, barefoot, a flower crown sliding over her curls, holding a tiny basket of petals she had gleefully scattered on her way down the path. As Amelia reached them, Adrian didn't speak right away. He simply reached for her hand. And she gave it. The officiant, a family friend from the art center, kept the ceremony short and sweet. But the vows, those were longer than any legal line. Adrian went first. "I thought love was about grand gestures. But you taught me it's in the small things. In soup when you're sick. In a hand when you're scared. In staying, especially when it's hard. I didn't deserve a second chance, but I was given one anyway. And I will spend the rest of my life proving I know what a gift that is." Amelia followed. "You were once the boy I lost. But now, you are the man who came back. Not with apologies, though you gave them, but with action. With love for a child you never knew. And for the woman I became in your absence." Elsie grinned up at them and whispered, not quietly, "Now kiss." Everyone laughed, and they did. A kiss that didn't erase the past, but rewrote the ending. The reception was held in the same garden. No chandeliers, No orchestras, just homemade food from Amelia's friends, lemonade in mason jars, and a 2-tier cake that Elsie decorated with edible paints. Later that evening, Adrian knelt beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You know," he said, "this day only happened because of you." Elsie looked up, eyes sparkling. "Because I asked you to marry my mommy?" Adrian smiled. "No, because you reminded me who I could still become." And in that moment, with Amelia's laughter floating in the air and fireflies beginning to dance between the flowers, he realized something. This wasn't the ending of a love story. It was the beginning of a family. Years passed. Seasons changed. But one memory remained frozen in time for Elsie. The moment she stood outside a glass tower in the rain, clutching a crumpled paper flower and asking a stranger in a suit to marry her mommy. She hadn't known then what would come of it. She only knew her mommy was hurting, and that sometimes even fairy tales needed help finding their ending. Now she was older, wiser, and she could see what others missed. She saw love in the quiet things, in how Adrian always left a sticky note on the fridge with Amelia's morning pills circled in red, in how Amelia waited at the window each evening until Adrian's car turned the corner, in the sound of their laughter when they danced in the kitchen, off-beat, out of rhythm, but always in sync. Elsie sat at the kitchen table sketching a new picture, not just a family, a home, with color in the windows, music in the air, laughter painted across every wall. Adrian passed by and gently ruffled her curls. "What are you drawing now, little dreamer?" She grinned. "A miracle." He smiled. "You mean Mommy?" "No," she said proudly, holding up the drawing. "Us." He kissed the top of her head. Later that night, Elsie curled between them during story time. Adrian read slowly from a book about a girl who turned storms into stars. Amelia listened, her head on his shoulder, her heart, once broken, beating strong and steady beneath his hand. Before drifting off to sleep, Elsie whispered, "I knew you were her happy ending." Adrian glanced at Amelia, but she spoke first. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "He's ours." Outside their window, the world continued, fast, loud, indifferent. But inside their bright apartment, filled with crayon drawings and second chances, a new story was being written every single day. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fancy. But it was real. Because sometimes a fairy tale doesn't need a castle. Just a girl brave enough to ask, a mother strong enough to survive, and a man willing to stay. And in that little corner of the world, love finally found its way home. The end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Folk Tales by Olivia. Here, every story reminds us that love is never too late, and hope is always worth holding on to. Until next time, keep believing in second chances.